Welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. On the 7th of October, Hamas shocked the world with its brutal attack on Israeli civilians. Today, more than a month later, Hamas is on the back foot. The Israeli military is in combat with the group in the Gaza Strip and deep inside the Gaza Strip. The group has said that it's ready to release up to 70 hostages in release for a 5-day truce in Gaza. Joining me on the News9 Plus show, live from Tel Aviv, is Colonel MIRI EISIN, Director of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism at the REICHMAN University in Israel. Colonel EISIN, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Hello, thanks for inviting me.
Colonel EISIN, I want to start by asking you about your take on Hamas's offer to release 70 hostages. Do you see this as a sign that Hamas is on its back foot and that it could actually be the start of peace in this horrible war that we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks?
Every single day, every one of us are thinking about the hostages. Let's put things into perspective. There are at least 230. They're offering to perhaps talk about 70 or 90. I want to look at that big number. From a 9-month baby to a 87-year-old Holocaust survivor, women, men, children, brutally taken, as you said before, from their home. When Hamas offers something, I look at it through the eyes of somebody who listens to Hamas, the terror organization. They do psyops all the time. Parallel to saying that they're willing to talk, they've never said who the hostages are, where they're held. They haven't said what their condition is. And they slowly let out, like yesterday, they said that Israel had killed one of our hostages. And I say that because that's part of the psychological warfare. They view the hostages as what is for them a bargaining chip. This is the asset, if we can think of it in such a way, of the brutal attack of October 7th. And we're 5.5 weeks later. We still don't know who's held there. So I want all of them to come home. I want Hamas to let them go, send them back immediately. But I, coming from my background, from what I do, understand that this is part of their bargaining, using, in this horrific terror way, using the hostages as their bargaining chip. I don't believe them for a moment.
Right. And Colonel EISIN, it's now becoming increasingly clear that Hamas faces two choices. It can surrender the hostages or fight to the finish with in the tunnels, wherever they are hiding. Which one do you think is more likely? Do you think Hamas wants to live and fight another day, or it would prefer to extinguish itself? Because clearly the way the Israeli military is in strength around Gaza, it doesn't look like Hamas has much of a chance. Do you think this organization wants to live or wants to fight to the finish?
Hamas is a terror hybrid organization. That's a hard term. It has a terror army. It's both part of the population, embedded in the population. There are 2.2, even 2.3 million people who live in the Gaza Strip. That's part of the way that Hamas, the terror hybrid organization, built its defenses. So you asked, are they, or what I understood is you're asking, are they suicidal?
Yes.
Will they go down and rather die than anything else? I don't think so. I think that they built their attack so that we, Israel, would be the ones who would be perceived as being the bad guy,
right,
as opposed to focusing on what a terror organization does when it's built into the society and it builds the subterranean, underground capabilities to protect the terrorists and uses the civilians above ground to be their protection. We look at that and go, something different. Only Hamas. Hezbollah does the exact same thing inside right. Lebanon. And I mention that because I don't think that Hamas is suicidal. And I think that they think that we will stop because the entire world is so breathing down our necks. And I understand that for the amount of civilians that Hamas has put at the forefront as their human shields.
Right. Colonel EISIN, in fact, looking at the brutality that Hamas inflicted on civilians and the hostage taking on the 7th of October, there seemed to be a plan to all this. This had all been very, very, meticulously planned, if there's a word like that. In fact, there was a report in the Washington Post recently which seemed to suggest that there was an even more intense plan of calculated brutality where, where it is about the assault on women or capturing of hostages. As a seasoned intelligence operative, could you tell us why they did this? This level of calculated brutality, was it to inflict the to expect the kind of retaliation that Israel would then, unleash on them, which is what we are seeing today?
It's a fascinating question, and I'm thinking right now as I'm responding, how do I respond? Because I think that all of us understand, the viewers understand, that this is the thing that we were so surprised by, meaning we did not understand this before. This aspect of the atrocities and the brutality are part of what this terror organization planned for a long time and then executed, and they had intended, as you said, to do much more than what they did, meaning they had even further plans to be butchering, torturing, mutilating, killing. The term that I'm using now is scorched land. I want to share with you that just yesterday, 5.5 weeks after that brutal attack, they managed to identify, based on a little piece of bone, the piece of a lovely woman, Vivian Silver, from Kibbutz Be'eri, who's been a peace activist her entire life, that part of that Hamas plan, part of that brutality, was to do it in such a way that we still have hundreds of people that are missing, that we don't know if they're hostages or if they were just burnt to nothing. And that is called terror. It is the ugliest, most horrific aspect that it surprised us. And I want to say it surprised us because we're human beings. The only way that they, the Hamas terrorists, could enact this is because for so long, I even want to say, decades, but that's so horrible, they have portrayed and viewed Israelis and Jews as being inhuman. Meaning when they did this attack, and if they would have done a bigger attack, and as they were glorifying killing and butchering and mutilating and torturing, they can do so because they have so dehumanized the Israeli, the Jew, and that's how they could do such a thing.
Right. And Col Eisin, again, do you think that the way these attacks have played out, the violence, the counter-violence, the Israeli airstrikes, have in a way united the Muslim world that we see now? And Palestine, a subject that was on the back burner for a decade or so, no one was really talking about, that has actually come front and center, and the Muslim world is once again talking about Palestine in a way that it wasn't before. Do you think that these attacks have achieved that objective, and that's something that we should be wary of?
I think that 2 billion Muslims in the world who have a religion which is not a religion of death and destruction, that 2 billion Muslims are horrified by the atrocities that Muslims did in the name of Islam. When a terror organization takes it to this type of extremity, I think that I've heard many, many Muslim voices who understand how harsh these atrocities are. The whole aspect is that part of the Hamas plan, and this has been done from the beginning, from October 7th, is that they not only lied about it, they put out not just a totally fake version, they are denying that they did any of the atrocities on October 7th. I have not heard the Muslim world or Muslim leaders standing up for Hamas terrorism. They're standing up for the Palestinian people. I will say clearly, as an Israeli, I have stood up more for the Palestinian people than Hamas have ever done so. That with this brutal attack, they broke people like me who so want to have a resolution, a peaceful resolution with fellow Palestinians. How do you do so when out of a population they grow such an aberration? So those voices that got together in Saudi Arabia on Saturday did not agree on anything. There's the picture photo ops. They came together and said a lot of words. None of them are actions. They do not stand up, not for Hamas. Maybe Iran and the Islamic regime and Hezbollah stand up for Hamas, but they don't stand up for Hamas. Israel wants to protect not just the Gazan people's lives, Palestinian lives. We want to do so by actively destroying this horrific Hamas capability.
So that's an interesting point you're making, the fact that the attacks were so brutal that the Muslim world would like to dissociate themselves from those attacks, and there is a possibility at some point that there would be peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
I want to hope so. I always, in that sense, I'm going to take it on a very local level. We're
Right.
a very small country, certainly compared to India. In Israel, we have a little under 10 million citizens, which is the state of Israel. And of our 10 million citizens, 20% of our full citizens are Arabic-speaking Muslims. And in this conflict, Sanjeev, in this time, those Arabic-speaking Muslims who are both inside the Israeli parliament, that are equal citizens inside Israel, they are the ones who have been clearly speaking out against the horrific acts that were done in the name of Islam. So of all places inside Israel right now, where 20% of our population are Muslim, these local Muslims, Arabic speaking, have been clearly saying this does not represent Islam. And again, I'm separating the brutal Hamas terror attack and the brutal Hamas terrorists that we need to stop. We don't want this to be an example for anywhere in the world, not for India, that would be horrible, or for anywhere. We want to make sure that this type of interpretation of Islam cannot exist. And as I said, there are those Muslim voices. I would like to hear them more. I absolutely support the Palestinians in their quest. And I absolutely, in that sense, say that for Israelis right now, we want to help and save the Gazan people's lives. To do so, let's go against that interpretation, that horrific interpretation of Islam as it came out in that brutal attack.
Colonel Eisin, are there back-channel talks between the Israeli government and Hamas? We are hearing Qatar as a mediator in these talks. And in fact, I was reading this piece by Seymour Hersh just today, where he's also talking of the fact that Hamas proposed a 72-hour ceasefire, and that he also seems to indicate there are some back-channel talks on right now. Would you be able to confirm this?
Can't confirm it. I'm not an official within the government. I can say that from my understanding of Israel, of the government, having been part of, as we say, the establishment for many years, I'm not now, that Israel, different from other countries around the world, one of the reasons that Hamas view the hostages as a bargaining chip is because here in Israel, we most definitely view every single Israeli, non-Israeli, they are our responsibility. We have to bring them home. We're talking about entire families that were butchered and the 9-month baby taking. And so these hostages, and when we talk about back channels, I have no doubt whatsoever, not directly with Hamas. Hamas are going to be destroyed, but with the representatives, if it's Qatar, if it's other representatives who are trying to come and negotiate that, that's how we get these ideas. We need to get the hostages home. I, as a military person, and it's true, I come from a military background, but as an Israeli citizen, as a mother, as somebody who cannot understand the depth of what happened, there is no precedent of a terror organization scorching ground and taking over 200 hostages as a bargaining chip. So if we can get them back through negotiation, that's the way. If we can get them back through pressuring Hamas and through that the negotiation, that's the way. It isn't a single event. So I can't confirm it, but I want to strongly believe that the state of Israel and the government of Israel are doing everything they can. That's not just military, everything they can, and that includes the military, to get all of our people back. And that's both citizens of Israel and not citizens of Israel. They took a variety of people from Israel on October 7th.
Colonel Eisin, now when you spoke about pressurizing, putting pressure on Hamas, there is a leadership that's there in the Gaza Strip even as we speak. Yahya Sinwar is a very key member he's the leader of the Hamas in Gaza. How critical would his capture be to end this war?
When we ask about these questions, it's always going to come back to the Gaza Strip is not, and I don't mean this in a belittling way, but it's not the mountains of Afghanistan. It's
Right.
not a faraway place. It is a very densely populated area. Yahya Sinwar, born and raised in a refugee camp inside the Gaza Strip in Khan Yunis. If I had to bet, if I was a betting woman, I would say that that's probably where he feels right now the safest and most at home. That is not in the area that the ground operations of Israel are acting in right now. We're acting in the northern Gaza Strip, not in the central and southern Gaza Strip with ground forces. We are attacking different terror targets in those areas, but constantly differentiating from the safe areas where we've told tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians to go to save their lives. The capture of Yahya Sinwar, that would be something else. There's no question whatsoever. But at what price? How do you get to him? He's using 2 million Gazan civilians as his protection. He's using 230 something Israeli hostages as his bargaining chip. So when you weigh that, it's not always worthwhile to try to do so because the price would be too high. We, every single person who is uninvolved, who is being the protection for these terrorists, we understand, and I am sure that he is overly protected. So it would be very important. I do not think that that is something which is actually achievable right now. I think that he's building on the fact that we would never do an action like that because the price would just be way too high.
Right. And Col Eisin, this looking at the long view of this war, do you think that has this war actually laid the foundation for a new generation of Hamas to emerge, from the rubble, from the families who have died in the fighting? There have been deaths on both sides, Israeli and Palestinian. Could there be a new generation of Hamas fighters that are being raised even as we speak, who 10, 20 years down the line could start off a new war? And in that sense, this conflict is unending.
Sandeep, I want to hope not. When I say I want to hope not, you're absolutely right. There's no question whatsoever that in a war, when I am going in with all of the capabilities that I have, trying to save lives, telling people to get away from the terrorists, trying to move them away from what the terrorists built within them, under them, and above ground. And you're absolutely right. It is going to definitely make more extreme that next generation. And here I breathe in deep. This is not the first war in the world. It's not the first war between Israelis and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. And I want to look forward and say, if we understand something, what you just said right now, and we do understand that we need to build a better, different future for the Gaza Strip, for the 2.2 million people, for the West Bank in that sense. And I just want to remind all the viewers, one of the reasons we were so unprepared, surprised, and failed on October 7th when Hamas planned such a barbaric, horrific attack is because that was what we erroneously thought was happening under Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But you can give young people different education. You can give them a different future. To be clear, it cannot be done by Israel. We are the bad guy. We are the one that is so destroyed right now to be able to get to Hamas. And in that sense, we, Israel, need to be working with other places, other countries, ones that will be acceptable for the Palestinians so that they themselves can build a different leadership. And I'm never saying it's easy. And I don't think it'll happen tomorrow morning, but we need to aspire and go in that direction. But that's hand in hand with showing that a barbaric terror attack that's done based on dehumanizing the Israelis does not give them any future. That's where we need to look at.
Absolutely. And Col Eisin, I should tell you about how we were viewing the Middle East and West Asia until the 6th of October. We actually thought that the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, where Israel and Saudi Arabia play a very key role, would actually usher in a new future. And we can only hope that there is peace in the future and there is, we can all work towards the economic welfare and well-being of all the people along this way. And let's just hope that, brighter times come back and the fighting ends, the hostages come back home. I want to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Col Eisin. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And from my religion, I'd like to say amen and shalom, and let us hope for a better future for all of us. We still have some steps to get there. Thank you again.
Thank you, Col Eisin. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was one of the key planners of the October 7 terror attacks on Israel. He's currently hiding somewhere in the Gaza Strip. In fact, we have this story on the hunt for Yahya Sinwar. Let's watch.
This is the largest attack that the Hamas has ever done onto Israeli soil.
Within 20 minutes, more than 3,000 missiles were fired at Israel, along with vehicle-transported incursions.
Their main aim is only to finish the Hamas network. Main lifeline of Hamas, that is the tunnel. Hezbollah is also their main target.
You can kill a leader or 2 leaders or 10 leaders. It may delay their functioning for some time.
Most of the Hamas leadership who have been mastermind of all these things.
And last 10 years, $1 billion has gone into, brought in by this leader which sits in there. So every leader has its own role to perform.
In the early morning of October 7, 2023, the world woke up to the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Within 20 minutes, more than 3,000 missiles were fired at Israel, along with vehicle-transported incursions. With this, Hamas announced the start of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. In a series of coordinated attacks, militants breached the Gaza-Israel barrier, slaughtering civilians in the neighboring Israeli communities and attacking military bases, resulting in a death toll of over 1,300 Israelis, including women and children. Soon after the assault, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared a state of emergency for areas within 80 kilometers of the Gaza border and pledged that Israel will win by calling for mobilization of tens of thousands of army reservists. IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, launched Operation Swords of Iron to launch an invasion of Gaza. The goal was to rescue the hostages taken to Gaza and parallelly wipe out the top political and military hierarchy of the Hamas, the Palestinian group that controls Gaza.
Their main aim is only to finish the Hamas network. Initially, they will destroy the main lifeline of Hamas, that is the tunnel services. They are the tunnel because once they destroy all these things, then it's very easy to make them not to operate in all these northern areas. Then they will go behind the top leadership. Most probably, most of the Hamas leadership who have been mastermind of all these things might be escaped or might be in the different in the other parts of world.
To find out who is Hamas and who is not Hamas is difficult. And also the Hamas is melted in the population across there. The population is not anti-Hamas. 56 or 60% in last voting supported Hamas as an organization. To say that the population will give out information that this fellow is Hamas and you can come and kill him, that is not simple. So you can kill a leader or 2 leaders or 10 leaders. It may delay their functioning for some time. The efficiency may be lost for some time. But finally another fellow will be thrown up and that fellow will take charge of the same situation and carry it out. How many people can you keep assassinating, saying that you kill leaders? It's not so simple proposition.
As of today, the IDF has successfully neutralized 2 of Hamas's top military leadership and is determined to go after all of them one by one, starting from Mahmoud al-Zahar, also known as al-Zahar, a Palestinian politician and co-founder of Hamas. Believed to be about 60 years old, Zahar was close to Hamas founder Mohammed Deif and has also served as foreign minister in the Hamas-dominated Palestinian Authority government.
He created $1 billion from Qatari government, which were fed into Hamas carried in suitcases and notes inside Gaza. That money which allows the fighting to take place in Gaza comes from Qatar. And last 10 years, $1 billion has gone into, brought in by this leader which sits in there.
Yahya al-Sinwar, also known as Yahya Sinwar, he is being referred to as the face of evil. He is accused of masterminding the recent Hamas attack, which left 1,300 Israelis dead. He is the current Palestinian leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It is al-Sinwar who co-founded the security apparatus of Hamas and is considered the second most powerful figure within the Hamas.
دعها سرا يا أبا إبراهيم دعها سرا ولتتحدث عن نفسها إذا حدثت.
Mohammed Deif Ibrahim Masri, or Mohammed Deif, often referred to as Al Deif, the guest, is a one-eyed Palestinian militant and supreme military commander of the military wing of Hamas. He is believed to be one of the masterminds behind the audacious October 7 attack. At present, his whereabouts are unknown, though he is believed to be hiding in Gaza somewhere in the maze of tunnels and is currently on top of Israel's hit list. Abu Ubaidah, one of the most ferocious Islamist Palestinian terrorists, was the person who announced that Hamas was holding dozens of Israeli soldiers captive in safe places and tunnels in the Gaza Strip. Ubaidah's actual name is not known, and neither are most of his personal details. He always is seen wearing a kafaya over his face.
إن الموعد المحدد للتهدئة قد اقتربت نهايته وإننا لن نمدد هذه التهدئة.
Ismail Abdel Salem Ahmad Hanaya, also referred to as Ismail Hanaya, is a senior political leader of Hamas and is formerly one of the two disputed prime ministers of the Palestinian National Authority. He is also the chairman of the Hamas Political Bureau and is the main political leader of Hamas, living in Doha, Qatar. It is he who named the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7 Operation Al-Aqsa Flood and pledged to continue the battle to liberate his land and his prisoners. Hanaya said that the Palestinian militant factions would press on with the operation in the West Bank and Jerusalem. It will be challenging for the Israelis to target Hanaya, as footage has emerged of him celebrating the attacks with other Hamas officials at his office in Doha.
فليكون على رأس الحركة في غزة أخ مجاهد من أسرى الحرية.
When they announced that they are going for a war, that when and they already decided, they already discussed that what will be the scenario if they go for a war against Hamas. They already know that many organizations like Hezbollah, ISIS, and many other organizations like TTP will definitely try and support them. So they already have all these inputs. But for them right now is the Hamas elimination or the Hamas network elimination is the top priority.
Whether the world will witness assassinations of these Hamas leaders or not, this will become clear in the next few days. But for now, Israeli forces are determined to bring back its citizens as well as citizens of other nations stuck in Gaza.
I want to introduce my colleague, Senior Assistant Editor Ghulam Jilani, who put that story together. Ghulam, tell us how critical is Yahya Sinwar's capture to the end of this conflict in Gaza?
So Yahya Sinwar is 61-year-old Hamas leader. He has been in Israel prisons for over 2 decades. He was released in way back some years ago in exchange, in prison exchange. Yeah. So it is said Israel is saying that he was the mastermind behind October 7 attack.
Right.
Why he is important is because he is not just a military leader, he is also a mind behind Hamas.
Right.
While he was in jail, he didn't only learn Hebrew, he also learned Israeli culture.
Right.
So if you see his interviews that were released on TV, you see he looks more like an expert on Israel as well. Sinwar is important for Israel because Israel has been saying from the day one that they want to eliminate Hamas and they are targeting its leaders. And we know Israel cannot do it without entering the Gaza Strip where these Hamas leaders are hiding. Earlier we heard that he is hiding in one of the tunnels.
Right.
I was speaking to one of the experts in Israel for a different story that we did. I was told that he has lost all communication with his fighters, and when a leader loses all communication, he is useless. He is rendered useless.
Right.
He might as
he's
well.
He's not leading them.
Yeah, he's not. He no more remains a leader. And if he doesn't lead, then he's useless. And Israel is trying to get him, but again, Israel has to get him. They have to go into the civilian areas. That is where these leaders are hiding. So getting Sinwar has been on their agenda like other leaders, and we heard none other than defense ministers saying that he has been trapped and we'll hunt him. So if he is hunted, it will be a big achievement for the Israelis fight to eliminate Hamas.
Right.
By eliminating Hamas, I don't mean that Hamas will end, because Hamas is not just the leaders, Hamas is an ideology.
Right.
It transcends beyond Palestinian borders. If you want to finish the leaders and eventually you will start, it's beginning of an end for the Hamas.
Right.
And the moment I say he's not able to communicate means his firefighters are kind of deserting him.
Right.
We heard.
So are they fighting on their own then? Is it what we believe that the fighters are now all fighting out on their own and
yes,
holding out on their own?
Yeah, I told you earlier that I was speaking to one of the journalists in Tel Aviv, Dan Pfefferman. He's in fact a retired major also.
Yeah.
He told me that these firefighters had deserted their leaders and they are fighting their own battle, which means this fight of Hamas, as it appears now, will not last long.
Right.
For Sinwar and for also like Mohammed Deif, who is
Yes.
also kind of moved south. So we see Hamas as, Hamas is nearing an end, not in terms of ideology, but in terms of their presence in Gaza, which is the ultimate aim of Israel.
Right, right. And in fact, while we're talking about Israel being in a 360-degree war, the United States itself is facing a similar war. 70 attacks in 29 days on US facilities in Iraq and Syria.
Yes.
And that's clearly Iran flexing its muscles.
Truly so, because see, if you look at all the Muslim countries who have been, jumping into this war, Iran is the only country which has been participating through its proxies. It has not sent its own troops, but it is sent. We have Houthis, we have Lebanon, we have Hezbollah in Lebanon. All these are Iran's proxies. Iran is the only country which is fighting the war through its proxies, obviously. And we saw, last week there was a meeting in Riyadh. There was a meeting in Riyadh which was attended by Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, and this is perhaps first time in 11 years that an Iranian president has gone to Saudi Arabia and shook hands with the Crown Prince Salman.
Right.
So it clearly shows that Muslim world is kind of united, at least in terms of rhetoric, except
Right.
Iran. No other country is sending its troops, but we can say that Palestine has once again united Muslim world, at least in terms of rhetoric. But again, if you ask me, will this convert into troop fighting? I don't see that happening, because all the Muslim countries, if you look at them individually, they have their own battles.
Right.
If you look at UAE wouldn't want to fight a war because it wants to project itself. It is in fact projecting itself, as somebody told me, as Switzerland of Middle East.
Yeah.
It is selling that dream to the world. For Saudi Arabia, there is this Vision 2030. It is hosting, stars like Shakira. So again, they would want to fight, do some rhetorics around it, but they won't want to fight. They would rather be happy if the US takes on against Iran, because there is that Iran versus Saudi battle that is happening all the time. If you ask Qatar is playing kind of a negotiator. Qatar is, as you said earlier, Qatar is kind of, trying to calm it, settle it down for now. But again, I don't see any Muslim country, fighting it on their own, except for Iran, which is through its proxies.
Yeah, meanwhile, moving to Bangladesh, 3 Russian warships pulled into Bangladesh's Chittagong port on Sunday. Very interesting. These ships, Russian warships, are coming there 50 years later. I mean, it has not been a visit of this nature in half a century. There's a lot of geopolitical jostling going on there, and Bangladesh has been one of the other areas of this geopolitical jostling between the West and Russia and China. Elections are just 2 months away, and I'm joined on the News9 Plus show today by Mr. Salim Samad, an award-winning independent journalist based in Dhaka. Mr. Samad, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Samad, the West seems to be worried about the fate of democracy in Bangladesh. How worried are the Bangladeshis about democracy in Bangladesh?
First of all, there is no democracy in this country since the country was born in 1971. That's very unfortunate, because if you look into all the draconian laws has been gifted to this newborn country since 1972, and the following year, still recently another draconian law has been passed by the parliament only a month before on the Cyber Security Act, which is in fact a legacy of the previous Digital Security Act, where they can stifle the press, they can definitely punish the delinquent Facebook user. This is a harassment, and this has, as I said, this is not a democracy. You cannot have a draconian law to criminalize suitable to speak.
Right, and I'm actually looking at this cover story of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on the cover of Time magazine, where she actually says that a very interesting comment about democracy. She says that democracy has a different definition that varies country to country. So do you agree with that, the fact that she's hinting at a guided democracy needed for stability?
Okay, if she's a political scientist, of course I would agree to her definition of democracy. As far as I know, she's born as a politician, born in a political family, and obviously I will not buy her narrative of the democracy.
Right, and there are growing calls from the US and the West for a caretaker government to oversee elections in Bangladesh. Do you see the Sheikh Hasina government agreeing to this?
I'm not sure whether the West has requested or asked or has proposed for a caretaker government or an interim government. The only thing they have been talking about is a free, fair, and a credible election. That's it. The only, if you talk about caretaker government, that's the opposition's, the rhetorics that have been mentioned about the opposition, especially the Bangladesh Nationalist Party.
Do you believe that there will be free and fair elections when they're held in January next year in Bangladesh?
I would not be pessimist, but there are reasons that the election there would be a lot of drama for announcing the election. The election should have been announced by this time. Usually in the previous election, if you talk about the previous elections with all the elections, the election commission gave 90 days time to the political parties to organize themselves and of course launch their campaign. But this time there is a new interpretation, which is of course has baffled the political scientists, the political observers, even the media. They said it's 45 days. So if it is 45 days, and if you're talking about November, so we don't have 45 days. So actually the election was understood and has been said several times. The election will be on the first week of January, right, which is of course, it can be any day, the 3, 4 or 5 or 6, first week of January. That was repeated by the election commission themselves. And of course the government has also never denied or has mentioned that there will be no election the first week of January. So, okay, but the election commission is now coming up with a new theory, I would say, a new idea or a new information that the election has to be held by 29th of January. Right. And I will not be skeptic, but let's see. Let's wait.
Also, there are wage protests in Bangladesh as we speak. The garment factories are shut, and the garment factories are your export engine, $55 billion worth of exports. Is that sector threatened by these protests? Have they anything to do with the kind of political backdrop that they're happening in?
You're right. There is two issues right now. One is opposition is continuing with their I would use the word called violence, to ensure that the government is not destabilized, but at least making the people uncomfortable, because you cannot take your vehicle, there is no bus. In the daytime, there is no communication. Everything is shut down. So there is a risk of people communicating. With that, it coincided with the garments workers, because the garments workers were scheduled for, because the wage board commission set up by the government, but of course representative from the garments industry and the workers union. So they were scheduled to be on the strike or on the protest to ensure that they get a reasonable, adequate compensation package, which of course the government has denied. And that is one of the reasons the entire the garments workers are on strike. But according to the Bangladesh Garments Manufacturers Association, they have shut down all the factories. I mean, they have made an announcement. So the factory workers cannot enter. It is very difficult to talk about whether they will get their wages. And according to Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister, she said that they have to go back. So and if they really wanted to get the new scale of the wages. So obviously, once you say go back to your factory to work and get the new structure, pay structure, means the roads is closed. So they have shut down the doors for a negotiation. And of course, the protest is continuing. Right. And I believe, that's my opinion, that not only Bangladesh, not only the workers, not only the garments owners, the brand owners, the brand importers, they have a responsibility in ensuring that the workers are appropriately paid.
Thank you so much for those insights, Mr. Samad. We'll be tracking elections in Bangladesh very closely indeed over the next few months. Speaking of politics, Britain's new Foreign Secretary is also its former Prime Minister, David Cameron. Cameron was one of Britain's longest-serving Prime Minister. He was in office for 6 years, which is historic when you look at the short tenures of British Prime Ministers of late. He was the youngest Prime Minister in over 200 years, and he's also an Indophile. We'll leave you with this episode of Dialogue with Barun Das, where he tells TV9 MD and CEO Barun Das about his India Connect. Do watch.
In the context of UK, even in the context of Brexit, why do you think that the future of multinational institutions like UN, NATO, WHO, what do you think their role is going to be? Are they going to be more or less relevant?
I think they're going to be very relevant, but I think they vary in how well they're responding to the challenges of the age. I think if we take the terrible pandemic that we've had, there clearly were failings in the WHO. Now, some of those are being addressed, but if you ask me honestly, I would say for the future, yes, we should do our best to reform the WHO, but there might be things we need to do as well that we can do faster. We need to have better early warning systems about future pandemics. And I think that's something we can probably do alongside the WHO. That's something countries can come together and do, because if we try to do everything by reforming the WHO, I feel we'll be sitting around and discussing that reform and not actually getting what's done.
As far as WHO is concerned, as far as I remember, during this COVID pandemic time, I always got a feeling that they themselves don't know. And yet they were coming up with directions, guidance from time to time, and often self-contradicting themselves. Like, I think I read somewhere in the beginning, they said, don't wear masks. Yeah. Then they said, mask is mandatory. So in the WHO context or any other context, I personally feel that you may not need to know everything, right? Nobody, no institution, but it's most risky when you don't know, yet you try and be convincing as somebody who knows. That's where WHO needs some intervention.
Well, I think they did what they could in very difficult circumstances, but we can definitely now look at what happened and learn from the weaknesses. And I would argue one of the key weaknesses is that we need to make sure we are sequencing the genomes of these emerging viruses and pathogens much more quickly and sharing that information much more rapidly. And I think there are examples of institutions like the Global Alliance on Vaccines and Immunization, Gavi, which have grown up outside the formal structures of the UN and the WHO. And I think we could have some organization like that for pandemic preparedness, where scientific institutions in every country around the world are doing this research, are sharing that information, so we know what's coming faster and take it out of politics. We have to keep these things, the science needs to be transparent, needs to be clearly shared, and we don't want to get bound up in organizations being embarrassed. They don't want to embarrass the Chinese, or they don't want to embarrass the Africans, or they don't want to embarrass the British. We don't need that. We just need the information. We need it in the most timely manner possible. And when I was Prime Minister, we had the Ebola epidemic in Africa. And again, on that occasion, the WHO was too slow. And so I think we've had two examples of where we need to have a non-political organization, science-based, shared between countries, telling us the latest information.
So will that happen under the gamut of WHO if you have to decide, or do you think there are independent bodies should come up with bilateral relationship, or maybe a collection of countries should come up with something which is, when you don't know things, you need to exchange your notes?
Yes, exactly. I hope that the G20 can give this impetus. They've discussed it, but it needs to be followed through. I think you can combine it with the new pandemic treaty, the global health treaty that's been discussed, which can address some other issues. But I think really what's important is having this institution in place so that pathogens are being sequenced, everyone's getting the information, and we react faster in future. Because I think one of the failings in the past was countries were too embarrassed to tell the WHO about bad things that were happening, and the WHO was too embarrassed to tell the rest of the world about what was happening because they didn't want to upset certain people. And so you get a delay in the system, a bureaucracy in the system, which we don't need.
The first part is, okay, justifiable. I mean, if something is going wrong, I mean, we didn't get to know about the COVID thing in China till the time it broke out of proportion.
That's my point. And the same with Ebola in West Africa, where there was a sense of the countries didn't want to admit to problems fast enough. But if you have an independent organization with Centers for Disease Control and scientific organizations in every country in the world sharing in real time that data and making sure the rich countries are helping the poorer countries to have the technology they need for genome sequencing and everything else, that, I think, could make the world safer. So sometimes these institutions are capable of reform. I think NATO as an organization is actually performing well, particularly with the challenge that has come from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Some organizations we should try to improve, but we should recognize we may need to go above and beyond them.
Coming to talk about some making change happen. You are active, very much active on your philanthropical side. I mean, and climate change is something that's on your radar, right? That's something which is of keen focus for you.
That's right. So one of the things I did back in 2005 when I became leader of the Conservative Party was to say, all over the world, there are Conservative parties that are rather behind on climate change. I wanted in Britain us to be leaders on climate change. And I said we wanted to lead one of the greenest governments ever, and I think we did. We saw a massive increase in offshore wind power. Britain became the biggest offshore wind power in the world. We grew the economy. We cut our carbon emissions. We set up the world's first green investment bank. Huge investment in solar. Reinvestment in nuclear energy, which of course is carbon-free. So I maintain my interest in this. I've just been in Australia talking with our sister party about the challenges they face there. And obviously it's great to be here in India where you're taking such huge strides with the investment in green energy. And I think there's a particular point here, which is countries like Britain and India should be doing more to help the poor countries, the vulnerable countries, where traditional investment in electricity generation is probably better done via decentralized energy, green energy, local grids that connect solar to batteries to help people with their local electricity, rather than thinking this is about big infrastructure projects. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to take to actually help switch on a lot of countries to both electricity and energy, but also to green energy.
News9 Plus. Download now.